I have to say, the best part of doing an event with a group of translators is not being able to pronounce the words in their bios as you introduce them. So I'm very grateful that you took care of that, Hal. And just in case it's not absolutely clear by now, we are holding this event this evening together in partnership with Community Bookstore, my local bookstore, and of course the Brooklyn Book Festival Bookends events, my local book festival and writers festival. I invite all of you listening, first of all, thanks for joining us. But all of you who are listening, I invite you to buy your books, the books that we're talking about tonight, like Olga Tokarczuk's Flights, translated by Jennifer Croft, and Jennifer's own memoir, Homesick, and Mieko Kawakami's book, Breasts and Eggs, and of course, Elena Ferrante's books. Buy them at Community Bookstore. It's, as they're fond of saying this year, I've noticed already that Christmas is coming early this year. It's coming in October. In case you hadn't heard, you have to do all of your holiday shopping in October, and you should do it at Community Bookstore, or at most at Terrace Books, which is the Community Bookstore annex just down the road. Without bookstores like Community Bookstore, our culture of reading, and certainly the kinds of books that we publish at Europa and a lot of our guests tonight translate, they'd be very difficult to find if it were left to the kinds of book retailers that, rather than enrich our culture of reading, tend to degrade it systematically. So do your shopping at Community Bookstore or your local independent bookstore. After that too lengthy preamble, I'd like to just throw out a question to all of you about translating and metaphors and similes, because I've heard so often over the years, well, translating is like, or translators are, and I think we should hear it from the horse's mouth. So what is translation like? What is it like?
Horses? Anyone have any?
Well, there's the actor.
Translating is like acting.
Yeah, well, it's like that's one of the ones that I like. Yeah, that the translator is an actor who's putting on a performance, and it's his own, in the particular version that I've read, he's putting on his own performance. It's a performance that no one else can put on. It's his work, I guess you could say, for that moment.
Yeah, I think that one works really well. I can't imagine acting ever, so I haven't.
I know.
Yes, I was in my last interview about translation. I tried a swimming metaphor, but then, and I got really into developing that, and then I remembered that I actually don't know how to swim, so that maybe also doesn't work. I don't drown as I translate. And now I'm working on a novel called Amadou about translators who eventually murder their author. And I'm thinking of translators as mushrooms who help trees decay and thereby enable the afterlives.
Right.
Benjamin reference.
I see.
The author's work. So now I'm a mushroom. That's what
Wow.
Yeah, that's a tough act to follow, but I don't know if you want to you want to give it a shot.
This isn't what I initially had in mind, but that reminds me of I don't know. Does anyone else remember from like Discovery Channel or science class days, those ants that get the fungus in their brains and then they become like a zombie ant and they kind of like go up. The point is to make them climb like up a tree and then die halfway for some reason, and then the tree gets like fungus. Fungus is definitely a really great one. I like I've read a great book called Fungopedia this year that's like a it's a guide about fungal terms, but it's really good bathtub reading if anyone is looking for any more this year. And I learned the word mycelium, which is like basically like the mushroom internet underneath the ground.
Yeah, these are great books to buy from community bookstore. Have you read Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Lives, which also just came out recently, which is about similar things, but like a little bit creepier, and it definitely goes into a lot of disgusting detail about those ants.
Wow.
I think you would enjoy it. It's beautifully written, gorgeously written.
Yeah.
So what have you guys been doing during quarantine?
Yeah.
Clearly reading up. Reading up on fungus. And so somewhere where translators are, I didn't quite catch, are they stoned ants that are stoned on fungus, or are they the fungus?
They're dead. And
I see.
Basically the mushroom, have you ever been cooking a chicken and like you realize that you can articulate the legs and arms of the chicken like all too easily just by picking up the chicken or moving it around?
Sure.
Basically the fungus gets in the brain enough to like make the ant walk even though the ant is dead, and it like gets the brain going, and then it just kind of walks up a tree or down a alley and loses its wallet or whatever else happens.
Yes, bite onto a leaf at noon. They always do it exactly at noon, face a certain direction, and then they shoot the fungal spores out of the tops of their heads.
You guys planned this ahead of time.
No, we didn't.
This ahead of time.
Yeah.
Well, we'll start there, but
yeah.
Cam and I know.
Michael, is it okay if I share a real metaphor though, rather than a ramble about an ant?
Yes, please do. There was nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's very late where I am, so I was really, really getting into that.
Good. Well, yeah. Well, I like the idea of explaining translation in terms of writing or reading. And in the case of this metaphor, it's kind of about explaining it through writing. I see the difference between writing and translating as writing is like trying to put ideas down with yourself over your shoulder. And I feel like translation is like trying to put ideas down with the author over your shoulder. So like you're still kind of doing the same thing, but the author is like, oh no. Ooh, that's good. You know, and you're kind of trying to get in both heads, the writer and the brain behind the writer, which really is a lot like the whole ant thing.
Yeah, when you said that, I was thinking.
Yeah, they were the same. That was the same.
I just want to get briefly back to the fungal question here, and the mushrooms and the communicating subterranean communication network. Because I know, Jennifer, you also, and you just mentioned before we went live that you're interested in the community of translators and how translators communicate, why they communicate. What is gained from translators being in touch with each other?
Yeah, so I have been in touch with Olga Tokarczuk's translators into other languages, as well as Antonio Lloyd-Jones, who translates Olga into English as well, for about a decade now. And it's so helpful to find that other people are having similar troubles with Olga's latest novel, for instance. And I find that they can answer my questions so much better than Olga herself might. I mean, I'm a little bit strange with this, but I feel like this is very related to Ferrante. I feel like I actually don't want any biography or, for that matter, any of Olga's life. I don't want that in my translation. So I try to kind of keep my friendship with her completely outside of the scope of what I'm working on, and just translate the text that she created and not add any additional explanation that she would inevitably provide because she's very generous. If I started going to her with my queries, she would, respond with these voluminous emails, and that would really change the translation. So, and then of course, it's also just great for moral support to always be seeing where everyone is in this 1,127 page book that we just finished, etc.
And On the question of sort of being in touch with authors, but also being in touch in a cosmic sense, given that we started off with mushrooms and fungi and things like that, and the actor translator, does the actor translator have to share some feeling with the work that she's translating or interpreting, some connection? Does the translator have to be in sympathy in some sense with the work that she's translating?
I don't think so. I think that at least for me, I whatever the work is, it becomes mine, even if I don't like it, in some way. You know, you just, I mean, you become, at least I do, become involved in the language and in making sentences, I guess. And it sort of becomes irrelevant whether you are sympathetic with it or not. I mean, I guess it's always easier if there's some, you know, connection, some kind of emotional or whatever connection. But I don't think it's necessary to be sympathetic. I mean, I don't know. I've translated some things that were rather unsympathetic.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask Anne if she always reads the books before she translates. Do you read them?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's really, I'm sorry to say, it's sort of dictated by deadlines to some extent. I mean, I guess ideally, well, I don't know. I used to think ideally you would read the book first, but then I had the experience of not reading the book first, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Be in real time with the with what was happening in the book, at least for the first draft. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, well, I think that's such an interesting question, and it goes back to Sam's mention of, you know, the weird place that translation occupies between reading and writing. And I sort of it never occurred to me that one could translate without having first read the book. Because I was discovering books in the countries where I was living and then pitching them to people endlessly, and then finally.
Right,
Yeah, so I had kind of a different experience, but I do really like the idea that the translator is conveying the same suspense that the reader should be feeling if the translator hasn't read the book before.
Yeah.
Something I really like about the process, so I actually don't read the books first. I did.
That's the principle.
Yeah, well,
Practice.
it's a deadline thing for sure, and like you said, you know, I'm usually working on 3 or 4 books a year, so and those overlap, so it's not really possible to read the whole thing through. But I honestly, I kind of dread the idea of reading a book first before I work on it, because then you have this idea. This all sounds advantageous probably, but then like you know what's going to happen, and that I don't really reread books like consecutively very often, and translating is like, you know, this like intense reading act really. So the idea of reading a book and then translating it, it's like I would get so many ideas the first reading pass that I wouldn't get again. So that's a huge, that would be an issue for me. I mean, something I really like about being a translator is that in a weird way, it's almost like you never read for me, I mean, I really feel like I've never read Breasts and Eggs, for example. I didn't read it before we translated it. I co-translated that book with David Boyd. And I haven't read I've read several final proofs and drafts and everything, but I haven't sat down and like read the book, you know, like someday I really would like to read it. It's like a maybe inane thing to say, but
Which language?
So it's from Japanese.
No, I know, but I mean, which language would you sit down and read it in?
Oh, that's a really good question, Anne. And I somehow hadn't thought of that when I was saying it. I don't know. They also came out very close in time, so I didn't even have the opportunity to really see it. I think we finished translating it before it was in stores in Japan. So I just couldn't have in that case. But yeah, I don't know. I'll let you know when I do, which I do. I don't know.
How, Sam, is your and David's relationship with the author, with Mieko in this case? I know that you have a connection to her. Do you enjoy that? Does that hinder you? Does it help you in your translation?
It's funny. I think I sort of see it as I mean, I really enjoy our relationship with Miyako, and I think it definitely helps the translation. I also see that as just a variable of the process, you know. And when you were speaking about projects that maybe feel kind of, we were using this word sympathetic, but maybe you could say resonate or feel like they're, I don't know, speaking to you. There's different ways of talking about it. For some reason, I got this idea of apartments, you know, like very few people design the apartment that they live in or even the house they live in. You kind of just find a place and make it work. And you find a place that you like, right? So there's a certain amount of interaction there. But I feel like a lot of the translation relationships I've had have been like that. You know, like I've translated living authors who I've never interacted with. There wasn't even an option. I've translated living authors who I could have interacted with, and kind of it just didn't feel like I either needed to or it was right. There might have been a channel. I've translated dead authors. And in the case of the dead authors, I don't know. I didn't really feel like I was missing a whole dimension in the process either.
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely situations where it can hinder the translation. I've been very lucky that I haven't had those situations.
Yeah.
So it can definitely hinder, but it isn't essential. I think it's a variable.
On the question of dead authors, who among you has translated something that had previously been translated? There already existed a translation.
Me.
Yeah.
Quite a few.
Is that quite a few? Is that a different process in any way?
I mean, I try not to think of it as a different process, but you do. I mean, not only do you have the author, but you have the other translator standing over your shoulder.
Yeah.
I mean, not really, but in some way you do, because you keep, you know, there's always the question of, I mean, sometimes it's obvious something needs a new translation, but sometimes you can feel that, well, yes, it needs a new translation because the old translation is old and language changes and what people want to read changes. But, you know, you think that, but does it really need a new, I mean, no, what am I bringing to this that it doesn't?
Does that very idea sort of weigh on you? That, like, do you feel the need to use a fresh language more than you would otherwise? Do you know what I mean?
I don't think I really think about it. I think that happens naturally, because I think, you know, it's 50 years later or whatever.
And why do you think that is? Because this is another question that I was asked recently, and I couldn't find an answer. Why is it that translations get dated in a way that originals?
I find that a very hard question to answer. You know, why does the original not seem dated, but the translation does? I mean, it does seem to be a fact that a translation seems dated, but I don't quite know why. Maybe because you take for granted that the original is written in a particular time.
Yeah.
Whereas,
did you go? I don't know if you guys went years ago. There was a festival series. I don't know. Perhaps you even participated. That was held by the New York School of Humanities, and there were some great translators there from into other languages. And I remember a French translator who had spent his career translating classics, or translating the Torah, the Bible, this, that, and the other, or, you know, the classics of antiquity. And he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, you know, the thing about translating the classics is that they have no need of you or even of your time. It is your time that has need of them. And that sort of made a difference in the way that he approached the translations. And you know, it made me think about that question that you just asked, Jennifer. Why does something need a new translation? It's not that it needs it, it's that we now need a new translation of that work. I don't know, that has stood for me as an answer somewhat to that question.
I think it's an answer, especially with, well, I guess classic.
With the classics,
yeah.
But in a way, also, it does need that. I mean, going back to the Walter Benjamin Afterlives thing, I mean, in order for the text to continue with life and be read by new generations of readers, it seems like it might they might need that, and they need it. So it's a mutual reciprocal need. Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt you too.
Oh no, it's totally fine. I wonder if it has to do with how we read translations, and I'm speaking as an American, talking about the United States when I say that, because I think translations are read differently, even in the UK or other English-speaking countries like India, for example. I think that there's a level of skepticism that is almost ineradicable that most readers will bring toward a translation. Not toward every translation. I don't think, for example, many people think of the Bible as a translation, even though it's like foundational in translation studies and as a work of translation. But this has to do, I think, or this brings to bear on how things get dated, because if you see something in a translation and you say, aha, that's a slang word from the 50s, and this is a novel from the 1890s, those things may be transparent in their time,
Right.
like if I said that's what's up in a translation from today, that might sound dated in 30 years in a way that, let's say it was a Japanese novel from the 80s, it can do whatever 80s stuff it wants. So I guess maybe it has to do with time allowing for us to see that the translation has its own kind of meshuggahs, or like it's almost like seaweed stuck to it, like things, artifacts of the era that the translation was made in, that the original is just allowed to have and the translation isn't.
So in a way, it just makes the context and the subjectivity of the translator visible, and people are appalled by that idea.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's that.
The secret is out, right? This was translated. It wasn't.
Listen, Sam, you used the A word, America. And I wanted to ask about that. Where are we now, in your opinions, with regard to works in translation in America, the American reader vis-a-vis translations, the American publishing industry vis-a-vis translations?
I think Michael should answer that question. You're an editor.
I asked that. I went to all that trouble of asking it. No, I think you should. I think it's. I really would like to. I think it's a question for translators more than anything else.
I mean, just in my very anecdotal experience, so I finished an MFA in literary translation in 2003. And at that point, I always found myself having to explain to people what translation was, for instance. And that doesn't happen anymore. I find that people are much more aware and actually really interested. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations with readers who are really curious about how the process works, and so that's been refreshing for me. But I don't know exactly, how sales figures have evolved.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, it's more attention paid to translation, and there are small presses that publish translations. There are the websites devoted to translation. So there's definitely, I think you're right. It seems more visible even in the time that I've been translating. But I don't know what the numbers are. So I've heard both things. I've heard that there are a few more books being published in translation. And then I've also heard that it hasn't changed. The percentage hasn't changed. So I don't know, maybe Michael, you know something about that.
I've heard that last year, the number of titles published were fewer. And, I think I'm just going by the 3% database of translations. I think it was fewer titles. But it does seem to me that, there are bigger players in the translated literature game now than there were 10 years ago. There are bigger success stories like Ferrante and Flights, and I think Breasts and Eggs as well. And so it seems to me that in terms of sort of, for want of a better word, market share, that translations are doing well. Yeah. But it's mostly anecdotal. I don't think we have any real, or I certainly don't have any real hard data on any of that.
I think one, Michael, another angle for talking about this is how are readers reading translations, and how are reviewers writing about translation?
Yeah, really
and
interesting.
I think Jennifer pointed to the idea of process. I think we're in a period where people are starting to realize that translation is a process and that it isn't like a cousin of arithmetic or alchemy. It's those are like two things that translation is, and it isn't magic and it isn't math. And I think that we're starting to see reviewers talk about translation almost like they're talking about like a hungover nightmare or like something like that. Like there are like intimations of recognition of translation as a process, but I think there's a terror in the hearts of most reviewers to talk about translation involving a foreign language, because you don't really prize bilinguality or even foreign language study in the United States, or we don't include it in education the same way, as it just kind of has to exist in other places. It really kind of has to exist here in that way too, but we don't really do it. And so I think we're kind of at a threshold where reviewers aren't really talking about what is happening in the translation or what happened, right? Like how certain things maybe were depicted. And I don't think it's actually important to say like, oh, well, this original word was this and they did this thing. I think there is a way to talk about translations into English from languages you can't comprehend at all. But I think that reviewers need to challenge each other to start figuring out how to do that. I don't think it's impossible. I think we just need to like develop a kind of language saying like, I noticed there's a lot of really like athletic prose in this section, and then in this other place, like the translator did that. We can, believe that they did it. So like, why is that happening and how is it happening? And we live in an age where, you can probably find someone who knows the language and ask them, pay them hopefully to give you some insight. And you don't need to pretend that you know Russian to review a Russian novel and talk about the Russian language either. I think everyone would applaud that.
Yeah, I think that's true, Sam. That's a good point. I mean, it might just come with experience as well, because the more I teach translation workshops or serve on these juries for international prizes, like I was just on the most recent Booker jury, and there are so many things that you can tell, that I can tell about a Japanese translation, for example, just from having read a lot of translations and without any knowledge of Japanese. There are certain problem areas that you can immediately identify, and you can understand exactly what went wrong there, and vice versa, of course. So I'm sure that will happen. I hope that will happen.
You've spoken about maybe sort of changing behaviors of readers and reviewers or critics. What about writers? I remember having a conversation with a very great Italian translator years ago who said, he felt that translators had done as much, if not more, to sort of shape narrative form and innovation and the literary language in Italy in sort of through the 80s and 90s, when they're translating authors like Raymond Carver and Laurie Moore, David Foster Wallace, that were introducing a new language for young Italian writers as well. What impact, if any, do you think are translations having on writing in America, on writers?
Very good question.
I don't know. It seems like there's such a small amount of, well, I don't know. I guess writers tend to be people who do read more translations, perhaps, than other people. So maybe there is some connection.
I think there might be a little bit of a lag in the US in a way that there might not be in other countries, because in the US, literature is so commercialized. And we have, these MFA programs. I did an MFA program, although I do think the translation program is a different kind of beast. But we have these MFA programs where students are learning how to write fiction that will sell. And you know, as much progress as I think we as translators have made in getting recognized for our work, it's still really hard for me to sell a translate. Like, I'll fall in love with the project and I'll go to 20 editors still and not be able to get anyone to take that risk because it sounds a little bit weird or it's structured in a way that is unfamiliar. So I'm not, there might just be like a very gradual trickle down effect in the US. Whereas I know in Poland, for instance, Polish poetry was radically changed by the introduction of O'Hara and Ashbery and American poets who were being translated. I'm sure that has happened in every country. Some version of that.
I think it's in an ideal situation, and I don't mean a fake situation when I say that. I mean like a situation where this, you know, someone's introduced to a new book that's a literary work in translation and they learn something new about literature. It opens their mind. I think what happens is that the reader recognizes that what they believe to be the limits of the literary universe are just like kind of this oblong shape that is not absolute, you know? Translating Breasts and Eggs, even though I've read a fair amount of Japanese literature, one thing that struck me, and maybe Michael, you felt this way too, Breasts and Eggs breaks a couple of pretty major rules that you can imagine an American editing English would be like.
Would have been edited straight out.
Multiple Ferris wheel scenes. You would not allow this in most books, right? You have one climactic or just one weird, interesting Ferris wheel scene, but you can't have like multiple. And there's actually like, depending on how you count, there's like 4 bathhouse scenes and none of them are particularly climactic. I mean, one of them is very strange, but it's not like, you know, something new happens the next time at the bathhouse. It's almost kind of the same scene. And that reiteration, like that return to images, which kind of has an accreting, you know, cumulative effect, is really striking. And I think it's really fresh when read in English, but it's also the sort of thing that you can, like translating, I just remember saying like, this would never have happened. Like, how did we get there? You know, but now it exists in English and anyone can read it. I'm going to hold it up because I haven't yet, if you don't mind, Michael, but this is what it looks like.
Please do,
Before. But yeah, it's part of English literature now. I know it's a Japanese novel and a Japanese novelist, but it's part of, you know, you can go to an English bookstore or a community bookstore online and read it. And it doesn't really only exist in Japanese anymore. So what does that mean for our concept of plot and craft, you know?
We shouldn't ignore any longer, I suppose, the fact that this panel tonight is entitled The Ferrante Effect. We turn our attention a little bit to Ferrante and ask, in all of this, the question of the impact on the market, the you know, how welcoming readers are to works in translation, the way that reviewers and critics approach translations, and you know, these potential innovations that are introduced into sort of the, you know, the bloodstream of American writing with a success like this. I don't know, can we say in a few words if there has been a Ferrante effect, and if so, what it is?
I mean, I think that one Ferrante effect is the visibility of the translator because of the absence of the author. I mean, that's definitely an effect. And I mean, I think it's obviously, I think it's a good effect, but I mean, I think it's good for all translators. I don't think it's not for me personally, but for everybody. That people are aware that there, as you were saying, Sam, I mean, that there's a process between the book, the original book, and the book that they're reading. There's a person and a process. So I think that's one thing that I think is partly a Ferrante effect because of her popularity, obviously. But so, you know, I mean, I hope everybody doesn't start writing and run-on sentences, but
But that, I mean, that, for example, is something that, it's another perfect example of things that would have been, cut straight out of any English language manuscript that came in.
Right.
But, because she's so good at it, I think it's also something that is commented upon, so often in reviews and criticism of her work, and as a quality more than anything else. Maybe not for every reader, but certainly, there are readers who have appreciated all of those run-on sentences.
And many who have complained about them.
Yeah. Yeah, true. And Jennifer, from your perspective, have you seen a Ferrante effect?
There might also, I strongly agree with everything that Ann just said. There might also be a little bit of a raising of women's concerns in fiction.
Yeah, I agree, that too.
Yeah, I think also, there's, people are seeing that there's like a lot of commercial and intellectual power behind these female characters and these kind of deep dives into women's relationships with each other. And I don't know what was doing that before.
Is there, can I ask I think is a difficult question from my perspective at least, what Ferrante says most powerfully about women's lives?
It's a struggle.
It's a struggle.
No, that it's, well, that sounds a little bit superficial, but actually it's not. It's in every direction. There's something that you have to work on, or her heroines, her characters.
Yeah.
Things are hard for them.
And does that hold true also, not only for the Neapolitan novels, Anne, but also for the new book, The Lying Life of Adults?
I think so. I think that the protagonist, Giovanna, she's working, she's really trying to grow up, and it's difficult. She's trying to get through adolescence, and let's face it, it's difficult to get through adolescence. And she, it's very, her struggle to do that is very vivid, I think. To understand what's going on around her, to understand the world, to understand so many things about the world that suddenly she's presented with.
And one of the other great themes, again from my perspective, that Ferrante deals with is the question of class, which seems to all of a sudden be a very timely, topical question in today's America. But it's also, a big part of Breasts and Eggs, Sam. It's a big, I would say, one of Mieko's great themes. Yeah, not only women's lives, not only the condition of women, the body, but this question of class and where women fit into class tensions and things like that. Do you see similarities between Ferrante and Mieko in this regard?
Well, I think two things that makes me think about is, first of all, Anne saying how like this idea of work in every direction, when class factors into that, when an author like Mieko is highlighting class and how it pertains to growing up and becoming a woman and your relationships with women, it starts to speak to the leg up that you don't have that you see other people having. Like knowing that you don't have the kind of running start that other people have. The opening scene of seeing the narrator, or the main character, not the narrator, Natsuko, seeing this young girl on the train, and that chapter is called "Are You Poor?" and kind of like talking about like how the number of windows in your house is indicative of how much money you have. Well, and a common line I think between Ferrante's fiction and Mieko's fiction is certainly that these stories are predominantly about women's relationships with each other, and not how they're ennobling or challenging men's lives, or how they're pertaining to or supporting men's lives, but how they're interacting with and influencing each other's lives and challenging each other. And the element of class in Miyako's fiction specifically, there are pieces of competition of that. And I think that you kind of feel a sense of like gravity, kind of like, or maybe inertia, like pulling on the characters, and that maybe inflames or kind of yanks on some of the problems that would have been there anyway.
I'm going to, we don't have a lot of time left. And before I go over to questions from our audience, I wanted to ask each of you sort of two questions, I guess, or a two-part question. First of all, what are you working on now? What's new? What's next for you? And perhaps before that, sort of what most attracted you to your most recent project? What was it that drew you to your most recent translation, or an author that you've translated recently? And if I'm looking at you, you couldn't tell.
So I guess the next translation that I have coming out is with a new imprint, a new press actually in Edinburgh called Charcoal Press, and it's an Argentine collection of short stories. It's actually just 5 stories, 2 short ones that kind of bookend the collection, and then basically 3 novellas by an author named Federico Falco, and the title is A Perfect Cemetery. And I think I did know the author beforehand. We are friends, but I really fell in love with this book in the same way that I fell in love with Olga's first collection of short stories that caused me to start translating her. And the other books that I've translated have worked the same way. And I'm starting to feel like maybe I over-identify with the characters in these books that I so fall in love with. And I may be re-evaluating how I select my projects going forward, because I got so attached to these stories and they were so moving to me. And I think that makes it a little bit hard to have the necessary distance when editing them, for instance. Just been thinking about that recently, but nonetheless, please buy A Perfect Cemetery when it comes out in April.
Yeah.
Okay, did you say me?
Ann.
My most recent.
I couldn't tell either.
Oh, I know. You could. Okay. My most recent book is Ferrante. Although I also just finished a book just came out that it's not published by Europa, however, but you can, I'm sure, buy it.
That's okay. I'm about to turn your screen off, Ann. No, I'm joking. Go right ahead. Actually, I really like this this book and this author. So.
By a writer called Nadia Terranova, who is actually from Sicily, from Messina. It's her second book, but her first to be published in English. And it's about a young woman who goes home to deal with her, well, it's called Farewell Ghosts. So it's to deal with the ghosts in her life. That is to say, her father and her mother in a way. But it's quite a wonderful book. So I would recommend that you buy it at the community bookstore. And I mean, most of my books have just come to me from, well, I had read another book of hers, but have come to me from publishers, suggesting them. And if they look interesting, I say yes.
Yeah, I know what Ann means about kind of things coming over the transom, and that being how you find stuff. It's been a long time since I've worked on something that I discovered myself. I am working right now on another long novel called Butter. That's actually the title in Japanese too. It's by Asako Yuzuki, and it's a story of kind of like exhausted Tokyo reporter who becomes obsessed with this serial killer. And when she tries to reach out to the serial killer, she asks the serial killer for her beef stew recipe, and that's how they kind of make a connection. The serial killer happened to have a series of wealthy husbands who she married and then killed after getting them to pay for really expensive cooking classes. So the story really explores the link between like cooking and kind of like identity, and how that kind of leads to guilt in certain situations, especially like being socialized as a woman in Japanese culture. But what really hooked me, I was reading the first chapter of it, I guess maybe 2 years ago in a Japanese literary magazine. And the book's set in 2011, just after the big Tohoku earthquakes, when there were a lot of shortages, just like we experienced this year for various foods. And that reporter character is visiting a friend, and she's in a supermarket, and there's no butter anywhere because dairy gets spoiled by radiation really easily. And when she steps into the supermarket, the narration says that it smelled like wet apples and cardboard. And it just like blew my mind that this is exactly what every supermarket I've ever been in smelled like. But I had never thought about that being a combination of two very common things that I could combine almost at will, right? Like it would take very little time to get wet cardboard and apples together, but it was so immediate. And it was like page 2. I couldn't believe it. It was really, that was it. I was hooked. It was like, okay, I almost don't even need to read the whole thing now before I work on it, you know? But yeah, that's in the works. I'm doing that alone. Butter.
I've got butter is on its way. I got a couple of questions here from Karen. Is there a way in which the increased visibility for the translator creates a new pressure on the translator to promote books, represent at events, and even be asked to represent or stand in for the author, something, Anne, that you have had some experience with? Does this become yet another often unpaid labor a translator must take on? Is this a pain point of pressure that you feel?
I mean, I don't feel it. I mean, it's, yeah, of course it's pressure because it's one more thing to do for me. But I think it's important. I mean, again, you know, it's important to make the figure of the translator visible, because you know, too often the translator is not. I mean, somebody was pointing out, in it used to be that you couldn't, sometimes you can't even find the name of the translator in a book, you know, say 40 or whatever years ago. So I think it's good to do that. And of course, it's good to, if you like the book, it's good to promote the book. I don't know, Jennifer, have you done much of that for your?
Yeah, I've done so much of that. I mean, I've done so many extra translation jobs. So like with Olga, with the book Flags, I spent 10 years trying to get that published. And then I did so much like social media for that, and of course so many events for that. And of course I think it's important, and of course I'm deeply committed to furthering her career. But it is very frustrating when I think that, you know, if I were the author doing all of that work, I could also rationalize it in terms of the royalties that I would be hopefully receiving by selling more copies of my book. And you know, especially like we're all facing different financial challenges, or at least a lot of us are facing different financial challenges right now. And it is hard to think, well, I'm just doing all of this extra work and I will never be remunerated for it really in any way. So I don't know. I'm gonna, you know, probably keep doing it, but it can be annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know what's helping and what isn't sometimes too, you know, in terms of like day-to-day social media stuff. But in my case, since the authors that I work with have, you know, if they have social media or they have online presences, their Japanese readership and their potential American readership almost does not overlap at all. So there's a real feeling that if I don't help, then it will make a very tangible difference in the success of a book. I don't know if that's real, but that's certainly what I think about when I'm, you know, like in bed at night, like thinking about, those are covers, not like a phone. But yeah, I agree with Anne and Jennifer that it can be a pain sometimes because on the one hand, like our job is to step back and get out of the way. And on the other hand, like sometimes we are like in almost every single way the representative or even like avatar of the author. So I think that the industry can make it easier for us and incentivize our involvement by standardizing a royalty system for translators, just making that part of normal practice. Certainly, I'm more excited about doing everything I can if I, like Jennifer said, if it will, go out that way. Not every contract can include that sort of thing, like if it's a work for hire from the beginning, I, recognize that that's a different story, but I do think that, it makes sense to integrate that or talk about it as an industry. And that's, I think, something that a lot of translators talk about, like when Jennifer talked about speaking with the other translators of her authors. I think translators can really benefit from conversations with any other translator of like almost any kind, whether they're translating literature or Japanese or whatever it is. Like we have so much in common. We have more in common with each other than probably almost anything else. So, and that's definitely a conversation that we all end up having at some point.
Is there, I mean, are there forums and venues for translators to meet in this way and to exchange ideas?
Yeah, right now, the American Literary Translators Association is having its first ever online conference, which if there are any kind of budding translators who are watching this, I would really highly recommend it. Just started. I just taught a workshop for them this morning. And there are so many interesting panels and sessions on just about every topic pertaining to translation that you can imagine, from the practical stuff about contracts, for instance, to the more theoretical side of translation, and readings. And it's just a wonderful way to meet people. So that would be a good place to start.
I have a question from Royce for you, Anne. I would like to ask Ann Goldstein how Elena Ferrante chose her as a translator. Has she translated all of Ferrante's work? And also, could she speak a little bit about the fact that no one knows who the author is and whether or not she, Anne, communicates directly with her, Ferrante?
I don't think that I think that Europa Editions chose me. And wait, what was and then the second part was, oh yes, and I've translated all her books into English. And to me, the question of who she is not relevant. To me, it's the person who wrote the books, whoever that person is, male or female. I mean, I assume it's a female, but I don't know. I don't know who she is. But there is an author who writes these books, and that to me is Elena Ferrante. I don't communicate directly with her. I communicate through the editors occasionally. Did I answer that?
I think you answered all of those questions. A question for all of you from Susan, and I think we'll have time for maybe one more question after this. I've heard some translators say that their job is to find the right word to translate what the author has written, or the equivalent of what the author has written. And the other translators say that they try to tell the story as it would be understood in the language that they're translating into. Is there a real difference between the two methods? Does the latter method of sort of trying to replicate the story, replicate the experience of reading that story, have any advantages over the first, or over the former? And if not, why?
I guess one quick thing that I would say is that, and I don't know if this is really an answer, but I've learned to recognize when I'm having fun and when I'm avoiding something, when I'm kind of being sneaky. And I think that having fun is really maybe something like flow state, or really feeling like you're in the head of the author, or what you think is the head of the author. But I think one of the weird pitfalls of experience and getting really good at what you do as a translator is that you can also get really good at avoiding certain types of problems, or maybe even like solving them in unhelpful or kind of like exaggerated or understated ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is I have two questions here. Anne, do you know when Lying Life was written?
No, I mean,
No.
it was written in the past 5 years. I've heard people, I don't know, I guess I've heard some other theories, but.
Yeah. And do we think that there's anything in particular that is driving an increased presence of translations of new books, or the availability of books from around the world? Is there one particular thing that is driving that? I think that's a no.
Maybe Elena Ferrante.
Maybe the Ferrante effect.
Yeah.
All right. Listen, thank you guys very much for this conversation. And thank you, Hal, and welcome back.
I'm back. I'm the worst part of the program when I have to cut things off. Well, thank you to everyone involved tonight, Anne, Michael, Jennifer, Sam. This was just a terrific conversation, especially when everyone, a small subsection of the industry like translation that is getting bigger, but everyone knows each other. It's just so much fun to just hear you guys chat back and forth. Again, I want to also thank the Brooklyn Book Festival for having this on as one of their bookend events. The festival proper will be taking place on Saturday. You can navigate to their website to find out a lot more about what's going on that day. And otherwise, kicking off of Michael's extremely nice shout out to us at the beginning of the program, I put a link to our website. If you want to buy any of tonight's books under discussion, they are also in the chat. We can get you anything and we can give you recommendations. But otherwise, we're going to wrap up tonight. Thank you again so much to our panel for joining us, and I want everybody to be safe. Michael, get home soon. And we'll hopefully be seeing everyone in the new year. Drop by at some point.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jennifer. Bye, Sam.
Bye.
Anne.
Bye.